The evening air was crisp in suburban Dallas, Texas. The city's skyline twinkled in the distance as Aaron Clarke pulled up to the circular driveway of a sprawling mansion in Highland Park. It was the kind of place you only saw in magazines or TV shows, a home with a perfectly manicured lawn, Grecian pillars, and not one but two imported Bentleys parked at the entrance. Aaron glanced at his wife, Eliza, who looked radiant in her emerald green gown. Her wavy auburn hair framed her face beautifully, and she smiled at him, offering a quick squeeze of his hand. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded, adjusting his simple black suit. It wasn't designer, but it was clean, well-pressed, and he wore it with quiet pride. "Just a little out of place," he admitted with a chuckle. "These people are something else." Eliza laughed. "They're just people, Aaron. And remember, Brian invited us. He wants to reconnect." Aaron didn't respond. Brian was her ex-boyfriend from college, now a wildly successful hedge fund manager who lived a life of glitz and champagne. He had recently reached out to Eliza on LinkedIn after years apart, claiming he wanted to catch up and see how life turned out. Aaron had his doubts about the whole thing, but Eliza had insisted. Besides, she'd said, "I want him to meet you. You're everything he isn't." That compliment should have been enough, but Aaron knew how the world worked. People like Brian thrived on putting others down. And Aaron wasn't exactly impressive on paper. He was a freelance woodworker. He made custom furniture in his garage, took pride in his craft, but it wasn't the kind of career that turned heads in a room full of investors, CEOs, and tech giants. As they stepped into the grand foyer, the scent of expensive perfume and cigar smoke mixed in the air. A butler in a black vest offered champagne flutes, and a string quartet played softly in the background. "Clarke," boomed a voice. Brian emerged from a crowd near the grand staircase, arms wide open. He was tall, tan, and obnoxiously confident. His suit probably cost more than Aaron's monthly income. "And Eliza, you look better than ever." Aaron shook his hand firmly, though Brian barely acknowledged him. Instead, his gaze lingered on Eliza. "I still remember that night in Paris," he added with a wink. Aaron's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Eliza laughed it off politely, changing the subject. "This place is gorgeous, Brian. Thanks for having us." Brian led them into the main ballroom where a dozen other couples mingled. Everyone looked like they stepped off the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Aaron spotted a few familiar faces, local celebrities, business owners, a state senator. He felt like a tool in a shed full of Tesla engineers. Drinks flowed. Conversations swirled around stock tips, NFTs, political donors, and expensive vacations in Monaco. Aaron mostly kept to himself, nursing his drink, watching Eliza socialize like she was born to be there. She was graceful, charming. He was proud, but that pride quickly turned to dread when Brian raised his glass at the dinner table. "I think it's time we all go around the room and introduce ourselves," Brian said smugly. "Let's share what we do and one brag you're proud of. I'll start." He launched into a tale about how he bought low on a failing crypto company, flipped it, and walked away with a $12 million profit. A few guests clapped, others chuckled, clearly impressed. One by one, the guests followed: tech startup founders, lawyers who won billion-dollar settlements, someone who invented an app that now had 40 million users. Then it was Aaron's turn. He cleared his throat. "I'm Aaron Clarke. I'm a woodworker. I design custom furniture from reclaimed wood." Silence. Someone coughed. Another person let out a stifled laugh. "Like chairs and stuff," said a woman with a diamond necklace big enough to weigh down a small child. Aaron nodded. "Yes. Chairs, tables, cabinets." Brian leaned forward, grinning. "So basically, you're like a really passionate Home Depot employee?" Laughter erupted around the table. Aaron felt the heat rise to his face. Eliza shot Brian a glare, but the damage was done. The laughter lingered. One man muttered, "Bet he makes a killer birdhouse," and the group roared again. Aaron smiled thinly, quietly humiliated. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Aaron Clarke had a secret. A secret that would make them eat every smug word they had just laughed out. The laughter slowly died down, replaced by the clinking of silverware and awkward sips of wine. Eliza reached under the table and squeezed Aaron's hand tightly. He gave her a half-hearted smile, pretending he wasn't fazed, but inside, his chest burned. Aaron had been underestimated his whole life. In high school, he was the quiet one who doodled chair legs and table curves in his notebook while others chased touchdowns. In college, he chose to study design and craftsmanship instead of business or finance. And in every relationship he had before Eliza, there was always this look, the look that said, "He's sweet, but..." But Eliza never looked at him like that. She believed in him. She admired the way he'd take a slab of forgotten wood and turn it into something beautiful, something timeless. And she knew the world would one day catch up. But tonight, the world hadn't caught up. It had mocked him. After dinner, the party moved to the outdoor patio. There was a live DJ, cigar lounge, even a private bartender mixing drinks with liquid nitrogen. Aaron drifted to the edge of the pool, away from the crowd, letting the sound of the water cool his thoughts. "Rough room, huh?" said a voice behind him. Aaron turned to see a woman in her late 50s, elegant yet understated. Her gray hair was pinned into a sleek bun, and she wore a simple black dress with a strand of pearls. "I'm Lydia Marks," she said, offering a hand. "Interior architect." "Aaron Clarke," he replied. Home Depot employee, apparently." She laughed, not unkindly. "Don't take it to heart. That crowd's not exactly known for subtlety. Most of them wouldn't recognize real craftsmanship if it hit them over the head." Aaron chuckled. "Yeah, well, I've been called worse." Lydia studied him thoughtfully. Clarke. Wait a second. Are you the same Aaron Clarke who built that reclaimed oak conference table for the Whitmore Foundation?" Aaron blinked. "Yes. That was one of mine." "I knew it," she said, eyes widening. "That piece is legendary in design circles. The entire boardroom was built around it. Your work's been featured in Art and Form. My firm showed your catalog at the Milan Design Showcase last year." Aaron's mouth dropped slightly. You did?" Lydia nodded, sipping her wine. "Why didn't you mention that in there?" He looked back toward the party where Brian was laughing with a few men in blazers. "Didn't seem like the right place? I wasn't trying to impress anyone." Lydia smiled. "Maybe not. But sometimes, Aaron, the world needs reminding that quiet power is still power." Before he could respond, Brian strutted over, cigar in hand, smirking. "Everything okay over here?" "Aaron, hope you're not hiding from the spotlight." Aaron smiled calmly. "Just chatting." Brian turned to Lydia. "You've met our celebrity carpenter, I see." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "Aaron is one of the finest artisan designers I've seen in decades. You might want to watch your tone, Brian." That shut him up for a second. But only for a second. "Right," Brian said with a fake laugh. "Well, if you ever get tired of sanding chairs, Aaron, maybe I'll hire you to build me a doghouse." Aaron smiled politely. "Only if the dog has better manners." Eliza, who had walked up just in time to hear that, let out a satisfied ha. Brian's smirk faltered. "Relax, buddy. Just having some fun." But Lydia wasn't laughing. "You know, Brian," she said coolly, "I sit on the board of the Texas Heritage Design Gala. This year's centerpiece artist? Aaron Clarke." Brian's face paled slightly. "And for what it's worth," Lydia added, "my firm just signed a contract to redesign the governor's mansion. Guess who's building the statement piece in the Grand Hall?" Aaron blinked again. "Wait. I am." "You are now," she said with a wink. Brian said nothing. Aaron took Eliza's hand and smiled. The tables were beginning to turn, and the best part was still to come. The mood had shifted. Where once Aaron was ignored or ridiculed, now heads began to turn toward him with curious eyes. Whispers spread among the elite like wildfire. Aaron Clarke. The Aaron Clarke? The one whose handcrafted tables now graced elite corporate boardrooms and designer homes? The same man they had laughed at an hour ago? Brian noticed the change too. And it gnawed at him. Inside, he had always seen himself as superior. He'd made millions through glamorous parties, drove flashy cars, and dated models before settling down with his trophy wife. To him, Aaron was a nobody. A blue-collar hobbyist who somehow married the woman he used to date. Brian could live with that so long as he stayed on top. But now, Aaron wasn't just some guy who makes chairs. He was respected, admired, connected, and perhaps worst of all, humble. Brian had no power over a man who didn't need to prove anything. A few guests now surrounded Aaron, asking questions. "Do you really work with your hands? Where do you find your wood? Can we visit your studio?" Aaron answered each question graciously, never boasting, never showing off. He even pulled out his phone to show a photo of a custom coffee table he'd just finished for a Grammy-winning artist. She wanted it to match the energy of her piano room, he explained. "Wow," one guest murmured. This is art." Brian watched from across the patio, eyes narrowing. He sipped his drink too quickly and motioned for the bartender to pour another. Meanwhile, Eliza stood beside Aaron, beaming with pride. "You've always been the same," she whispered to him. "And that's why they'll never be able to keep up." Suddenly, someone tapped Aaron's shoulder. It was a sharply dressed man with silver hair and an intense gaze. "You probably don't know me," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Thomas Granger. I run the Granger Design Institute in San Francisco. I've seen your work. That reclaimed walnut armoire you did last year? Absolutely breathtaking. Aaron, caught off guard, shook his hand. Thank you, that's very kind. No, Granger said. Thank you. I've been trying to find someone with your eye for detail and originality. We're launching a new modern heritage line and I'd like you to design the flagship pieces. Exhibition-level work. Commissioned. Top dollar. Interested? Aaron blinked. I'd be honored. Granger handed over his card. Let's talk next week. I want you on this project. You're exactly the kind of artisan the industry needs right now. As Granger walked off, Brian practically exploded out of his seat and came marching over. Whoa, hold on, Brian said, forcing a laugh. Thomas Granger just gave you a commission? Like the Granger? Aaron smiled faintly. Apparently so. Brian narrowed his eyes. Funny. Just a couple years ago, you were posting little Etsy listings and begging people to visit your garage workshop. What changed, huh? Aaron's smile didn't fade. Nothing really changed. I just kept building. And some people noticed. Brian scoffed. Come on, man. Let's be real. This is pure luck. A fluke. You think just because you nailed some old planks together, you're suddenly a design genius? Eliza stepped forward, eyes blazing. No, Brian. It's not luck. It's talent. It's vision. And it's years of work you're too arrogant to understand. There was a hush. People had overheard. Lydia stood nearby. So did Granger. And several guests who were now clearly reevaluating who the real success in the room was. Brian opened his mouth but couldn't find a comeback. Not one that wouldn't make him look like an even bigger fool. Aaron leaned in slightly. Not with aggression, but with calm strength. I don't need to impress you, Brian. I build things that last. You throw parties to forget how empty your life feels. And with that, Aaron turned to the crowd of intrigued guests now surrounding him, asking about his work, his process, his passion. Brian? He stood alone, Scotch glass sweating in his hand. As the night drew on, Aaron found himself the unintentional star of Brian's soiree. People gathered not around the bar or the DJ booth, but around him. The man they mocked earlier now captivated them with quiet stories of craftsmanship, of building tables that told stories, of blending modern style with soulful tradition. Eliza stood beside him, watching with admiration. Not because her husband had suddenly become the center of attention, but because he hadn't changed a bit in the process. Aaron wasn't gloating. He wasn't even aware of how poetic it all was. He just talked about what he loved. And the world finally listened. One guest asked, so, what drives you? Money? Fame? Recognition? Aaron shook his head. Nope. I just love creating something that'll outlast me. A table of family gathers around. A desk someone writes their novel at. A bench in a park where someone falls in love. That's legacy to me. There was a pause. And then applause. Not polite. Not forced. Genuine. Meanwhile, Brian sat on the edge of a lounge chair near the fire pit, staring into the flames, jaw clenched. His wife, Cassandra, walked up slowly, her face unreadable. Interesting evening, she said. Brian didn't answer. You know, she continued, when you invited Aaron, I thought maybe you were trying to make peace. But watching you tonight, you just couldn't let go of the past, could you? Brian scoffed. He's a guy who makes furniture. I'm a venture capitalist. It's not even the same world. Cassandra tilted her head. That's funny. Because from where I'm standing, he's the only one tonight who built anything real. Brian looked up at her sharply. What's that supposed to mean? I mean, she said, eyes narrowing, you chase money, throw parties, and pretend it all matters. But Aaron? He lives for purpose. People like that don't need to impress anyone. And tonight, he didn't even try. That's why everyone's talking about him. Not you. Brian stood up. He stole the spotlight at my party. No, she corrected. You handed it to him the moment you mocked him in front of his wife. Brian turned toward the patio, watching Aaron laugh with two gallery owners and a couple of young architects. Then he noticed Lydia handing Aaron a leather-bound design brief. More opportunities. More respect. He felt something ugly rise in his chest. Jealousy. Rage. Insecurity. All wrapped up in a tuxedo and a fake smile. Then something cracked. Brian marched over to the table where Aaron's phone lay charging and, in a moment of bitter stupidity, picked it up. Aaron, he called. Hey, buddy. Great story about legacy and benches. Very hallmark. But let's not forget everyone starts somewhere. He held up the phone, flipping through photos. Let's see what you were making 5 years ago. Aaron stepped forward, calm but alert. Brian, put the phone down. But Brian continued. Ah, look at this beauty, your early work. A bench that looks like it came from a junkyard. And this? Is that a rocking chair made from plumbing pipes? Some guests laughed awkwardly. But Aaron didn't flinch. Yeah, he said, stepping into the spotlight. That bench? I made it from scrap wood behind a salvage yard. A single mom bought it for $25 so she could read to her daughter outside. And the pipe chair? That was for a war vet who lost his legs and needed a chair with a low center of gravity. Charged him $10. He cried when he saw it. The laughter died instantly. I don't build to impress anyone, Aaron said. I build to make people feel human again. Silence. Even Brian couldn't speak. Then Granger stepped in. Brian, maybe you should sit the rest of this night out. Lydia added, or go home. Before you embarrass yourself further. Brian lowered the phone and walked away, defeated not just by Aaron but by his own pettiness. Aaron turned back to the crowd. Now, if anyone wants to talk about the future of design rooted in meaning, I'm all ears. The crowd erupted again in applause, and this time it was thunderous. The night wore on, but the dynamics of the party had irrevocably changed. Aaron, now surrounded by a small crowd of admirers, shared more about his work, the tools he used, and the philosophy behind his craft. Guests who had once viewed him with condescension now listened with genuine interest. They marveled at the thoughtfulness behind his designs, the integrity of his craftsmanship, and the quiet humility that seemed to radiate from him. Eliza stood close by, a satisfied smile on her face. She had always known the real Aaron, steady, honest, and dedicated to his craft. Tonight, the world was finally seeing it too. Meanwhile, Brian sat at the far edge of the patio nursing his drink, his eyes fixed on the spectacle before him. The weight of humiliation bore down on him as he watched Aaron, the man he had dismissed and ridiculed, receive praise and admiration. His mind raced, but no matter how hard he tried to justify his actions, a knot of regret tightened in his chest. The alcohol, which had once provided a mask for his insecurities, now only served to amplify them. He had tried to tear Aaron down, to show everyone that he was the one with power, the one who was better. Instead, he had only revealed his own weaknesses, his envy, his arrogance, his inability to see value in anything that didn't fit into his narrow view of success. Brian's thoughts were interrupted when Cassandra approached him once more, her tone softer this time. You know, I'm not sure why you thought you had to be this way tonight, she said. What are you trying to prove? Brian looked at her, his face flushed with a mix of frustration and shame. I don't know. I couldn't stand how everyone was looking at him. Like he was some kind of genius. It doesn't make sense. He's just some guy who builds furniture. That's it. Cassandra raised an eyebrow. That's it? You really don't get it, do you? Brian stared at her, confused. What do you mean? Look around you, she said, her voice tinged with disappointment. Do you see why people are drawn to him? It's not because of some fancy title or a massive paycheck. It's because Aaron stands for something real. He's built his life on something meaningful. People can see that. They can feel it. He's not pretending to be someone he's not. Brian's gaze shifted to Aaron, who was laughing with Granger and a few other influential figures in the design world. For the first time that evening, Brian noticed the way Aaron carried himself, not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He simply was. Maybe you're right, Brian muttered, looking away. Maybe I was wrong. You don't have to admit it to me, Cassandra said, her voice gentler now. But you'll have to admit it to yourself someday. We all have our own paths. Aaron has his. And you have yours. But don't forget, success isn't always about what's in your bank account. It's about what you leave behind. Brian was silent for a long time, staring into the flames of the fire pit. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just hours ago, he had been the one holding court, the one everyone was eager to impress. Now, it was Aaron who stood at the center of attention, and it was Brian who was left to grapple with the bitter taste of his own pride. Across the room, Aaron caught his eye. He didn't smile smugly or mock him. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that said everything. It was a moment of clarity for Brian. He realized that, for all his wealth and influence, he had missed the one thing that truly mattered, the ability to build something lasting, something with heart. The night ended, but the lesson lingered. As guests began to filter out, Brian found himself standing beside Aaron. He wasn't sure what to say, but he knew he had to say something. Aaron, he began, his voice quieter than usual, I owe you an apology. I was out of line tonight. I was jealous. And I was a fool. Aaron smiled, offering a firm handshake. We all have our moments, Brian. But it's never too late to change. Brian nodded, a weight lifting off his shoulders as the words left his lips. He still didn't fully understand everything about Aaron's journey, but he respected it. And perhaps, for the first time in years, he respected himself a little more too. As Brian walked away, his mind shifted. Maybe it wasn't too late to build something real. Maybe it was time to stop chasing the illusion of success and start chasing the things that would matter long after the parties were over.